Hello everyone, I'm Lucy from the Virtual Art Fair, and tonight we have another of our artist talks. Tonight we should have Sonia interviewing Sam. We've been really looking forward to this one. So let's see if we can get them on board. Hey Sam.
Buonasera. Good evening.
Hey, and Sonia.
Things are working today.
Oh, this is fantastic.
This is great.
Seamless. It's beautiful. So tonight, Sonia, you'll be interviewing Sam.
That's right.
It's going to be amazing. So I will turn my screen off. I'll still be on the chat. So when you're about to round up or when we hit the hour mark, you'll see my face again. So ciao for now.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Well, that was amazing actually to see the three of us together again after pretty much a year and a half, because we met at the very first the Virtual Art Fair exhibition, didn't we?
Yes, that's correct. Now you remind me. Yeah, that's true.
At the very first exhibition, as the first lockdown was happening, and we had a Zoom chat, and we were both participating, and we've actually been participating throughout pretty regularly on myself, I think 4 different virtual exhibitions with Lucy Morrison. So yes, God, we're becoming a little family, aren't we?
Yeah, it's been really, really positive. First of all, thanks to Lucy for introducing us. These interviews have been really great, a good addition to what has been, over the past year, an excellent series of exhibitions. Yeah, I do remember that, now you mention it. It's such a long time ago, but since then it's really developed. So yeah, thanks for reminding me. That was a nice one. Yeah.
So let's begin at the beginning. Could you tell us a bit about your background?
Sure. Well, my name's Sam Vickers.
Yeah.
I'm an English artist in self-appointed exile in Turin in Italy. I've been living here for 3 years, more or less. I'm an art graduate. I graduated in sculpture at Bath Spa University in 2010. And since then have done possibly every single conceivable thing you can imagine. Lived in lots of different places, and as a result, the work is multidisciplinary for the past 3 or 4 years, certainly. So yeah, I would say that most of my work is interdisciplinary, but has a lot of roots in situationist thought. So late 60s and early 70s is a big influence for me.
Okay. I've just realized I haven't introduced myself. I'm Sonia Ben Achoura, and I'm an artist based in London, interviewing Sam. So your work is conceptual, isn't it? You describe yourself as a conceptual artist?
I would do. Yeah. It's a very loaded term, but I think every idea for me, the concept is in many ways much more important than the final result. I believe that if an idea is strong enough to be a good idea in the first place, then you need to promote that. You know, where did that idea come from? So for me, yeah, conceptual art is something that I do regard myself as doing, because it has no real limits in terms of what you can achieve artistically.
Okay, so is that because of the training you had in art school, or is that because you just prefer to start with the strong concepts and work from there?
It's an interesting one. I think it is like I wrote all this down, right? But it's not coming to me. All right, there are four parts to this, I think. When I left university, I was very interested in those artists of that period. So the beginnings of postmodernism. But then I left the art scene and was involved in the music industry for a number of years, which in itself is a performance. So I was in a series of groups playing in London around town. The first thing to mention about this is it kind of gave me an interest in album art and band photography. Okay, so either being in the band or running the advertising, if you like. Okay, the design.
You were a drummer. You were a drummer, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right. But I did a lot of work with groups in terms of their visuals. So this in turn got onto graphic design and how an idea is kind of hidden within something. So as a result of that, traveling around the country, doing tours and going to certain locations to make stuff, right, was a very interesting part of the process of making work, which for me was quite addictive. The process of going outside of your studio to find a location or to find something that means something which you can work with. There's nothing physical, it's just a place, and whatever happened. And there's no physical material. Everything.
So it sounds a lot more about your own evolution than your training.
Yes, sculpture was a great course to do, and it gave me a lot of ideas about how to present work in spaces like installations and more experimental things. But once that finished, I think the element of graphics and doing one-off performances was an influence in itself for me personally. So that would be the second thing. Yeah, it went into graphic design, so designing album covers, etc. And then the third thing, how can I say this? Since the move to Italy, after a while, I lived in London for a number of years, as I say. After I moved to Italy, there's a new space, a new context to live in. You learn a new language, you learn everything from scratch, which has been fascinating. And the work here has morphed again just because of that simple reason, that location means something new. Definitely.
And location is hugely important, clearly.
For the work for the past 1 year, it's interesting really, because of this whole situation, the work has kind of gone away from location. Because I'm not able to get to them. So the work recently, like the one behind me I've been working on, is a collage, which is more of a social experiment. But I think the work before that and the work that I will do in the future will definitely approach location again.
Okay, could you tell us a bit more about that? What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that?
What sort of locations are you interested in? Is it always the same sort of locations, or do you look for simply something new and stimulating?
I look for things
what are the requirements of a location?
I look for something that symbolizes either society, a system, the way that we live, or the way that we think about it. Psychogeography is a big part of the way I think about things.
Okay.
But the reason I do this in Italy is because I don't have any background about what this place is. Not really. Okay, like say for instance in London, if you were to do a piece of work around the Houses of Parliament or something overtly political, that would be very, very difficult to pull off. Just because everyone that you realize knows something about this location. But here, it's different for me. I appreciate things on a more basic level. What is this? I don't know what this is. I don't know the history of this building. So that would be an interesting thing for me to explore this year. Either Italian history or the economic miracle I've dealt with in the past from the 50s, and how that still has an effect on people around here. So I hope to do that this year. Find more locations with some more significant meanings. Definitely.
Okay. And you've been in Italy for 3 years now?
Yes, coming up to 4.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. And do you have any idea what next?
What's next? Yeah, I will be showing this piece of work in September, I hope.
Okay.
So I'd like to, buongiorno dal ATB, la galleria, se voi sta guardando, buonasera. Yeah, ATB have been really good recently, a gallery that I got involved with, and they were a judge on the recent prize exhibition. So I hope to do some things with them this year.
Excellent.
Yes.
So you have long-term plans in Italy. You're not planning on relocating altogether anytime soon.
Well, never write it off. I think I'm one of those artists. I think I just get bored very quickly. Never really satisfied with something for whatever reason. But I like it here. There's an interesting energy about the place. So yeah, I plan to stay here for a little while.
Okay. It's quite a common thing among artists, isn't it? That restlessness.
Yeah,
It
it's something that either I'm very scared of, maybe personally, like that feeling of comfort of, okay, I know what I'm doing. Yeah, there's something about that which is a bit disconcerting, perhaps. Especially for someone or artists like me who are multidisciplinary.
And just the stimulation of moving around, just new stimuli, is pretty invaluable.
Definitely.
I definitely need the traveling aspect. And this year has been really tough, actually. I've really missed traveling. So could you tell us about this project you've got behind you?
Yeah,
that's a big project from what I looked at in your website. It's been quite a lengthy project. And I'm quite curious because you seem to invite people to participate. So could you tell us about that?
Yes, this is choice material. This is a time-based social experiment which discusses waste material and first impressions. Okay, they're the two major questions or the things I want to question about this work. It's a collage, and it nicely frames my head at the moment.
Like a halo, like some sort of...
In a sense, yes, but no, I'm not religious in that sense. However, yeah, the project started in January as a result of another project which I did last year, which I was interested in people choosing the material for me. So my role as an artist is only one of a producer. Almost like what I was doing with the bands years ago. Like, what do you want? Where do you want this? What color? Okay. The decision was not mine to make. So this piece of work is rough material, scrap material that I have lying around, which for me has no real significance apart from that it once existed in a certain project. But for me, this project, I allow people to choose which one they want as a kind of voting system on social media. So what happens is I present each week a list of options and people can choose what they like. And every single piece goes on this kind of mandala-ish effect, which I'm sure that you'll recognize.
Very, very much so.
Yeah, that was a good interview last week. I enjoyed it.
Great.
But I think this piece is the most ambitious one in terms of social interaction. So I really like that idea that I'm really not doing anything. I'm not thinking about it. I like the idea of subverting the idea of process art, really, because it can be quite dry, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting. It's a completely changing the perspective on how you're doing art, because usually we get bogged down in doing things ourselves, and every choice comes down on ourselves. Choice of material, composition, color, every single element, which makes it really appealing to start with for many artists. But then is when you redirect some of those elements and involve other people. So are you saying this collage is made of different materials, not just cuttings of paper?
Different materials, yes. So
yeah.
The essence of this work is on canvas, so all the materials are flat, two-dimensional.
Okay.
But they range from paper to fabric to sandpaper, anything that I once used for something. So I'm interested in whether people are choosing them for their aesthetic value or for anything else that I'm not really aware of. Because
Okay.
I believe that when people look at new art or new pieces of work, it's like, why do I like this? What is it, a yes or no answer? But with choice material, I'm just presenting stuff which, for me, is rubbish and needs to be recycled in some way. So this one is a concentric design, which started in January, actually. So I'm enjoying the rigors of it, the kind of the discipline of creating something over that amount of time, which is quite unusual for me. Something's produced quite quickly usually, to keep it fresh, But this one, as it's a time-based piece, is is entirely necessary to keep it this long.
Great. So it's not just about the colors, but the textures.
No.
Makes it a lot more interesting, I guess, because I couldn't really see. I thought it was just a paper collage at first, but there's actually a lot to it in terms of the materials and the utilities of some of the sections, and also that the ecological aspect. So, are you writing about it? Is it a process that you're actually documenting somehow, because it is a really lengthy process? It's coming to 5 months.
Yeah, I mean, recently I have started writing essays. I publish these on the website, samvickers.net. But artist writing is something I was always interested in. I mean, for instance, I'm a big fan of Jonathan Meades and Patrick Keeler, British writers who talk about art and culture, really. And I really like that kind of irreverent style of writing. So yes, I have written about this, and it's been going quite well. It makes me think more about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
If you write about it in a serious way.
Yeah.
There was some part of me thinking about if I didn't write about this piece of work and you asked me about it, I would just be, I have no idea what to say. Right?
Yeah.
But in terms of what choice material has done, it's really narrowed down some primary interests in terms of how a piece of work is made.
Definitely. I've always found that art and writing really go hand in hand. And it just helps you to verbalize what you're doing just for yourself as a starting point. And then it can become incredibly interesting to others. And it helps you to document what you're doing and your process, pretty invaluable, actually.
Yeah, I found it very beneficial. I don't know, people look at your work in a different way after you do this, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah. Have you felt that?
I do, yeah. Yeah. I think that overall as an artist, one thing is to just produce artworks, but then you also have to be able to explain what you're doing, where you're going with your art, that whole process. There's an evolution to it, and then just verbalizing exactly what it is you're doing. It's actually pure magic when you get to that point where you really understand what you're doing. Because many new artists are often really confused. Some people find it impossible at the beginning to actually tell you, this is what I'm doing with my art, which is really quite odd in a way, because you this work, you're spending months working on a piece sometimes, but then in words, it just becomes something else. But it is a skill, I think. It's a skill that comes with years of practice and just that understanding what's the inspiration, what am I doing here, really pinpoint it and be able to communicate it. There's a real force to it, I find.
Yes, I would agree.
It's like alchemy, really. It's like alchemy, and art has a lot of magic to it. But I find that there is a huge power in being able to say, this is what I'm doing, this is what it means, and where you're going with it. Yeah,
because before, it still happens, even now, that something would spark off in the middle of the night and I would not be able to sleep or do anything about it. But then when you start writing, that happens less, definitely. It's like some kind of weird self-help when you do this. Yeah.
Well, it's actually really therapeutic as well, it has to be said.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Yeah. And I've done a lot more writing during lockdown, actually. There's been, I think it has caused that in many artists just stuck at home or stuck in a studio. It kind of turned people inwards a lot. So putting things into words, I think it's been really quite an interesting moment for me. It's really changed things.
I'm glad. Yeah. I mean, how much do you write? I mean, is it in terms of length? I mean, are they on one particular piece of work?
I used to do it really regularly in the past, because painting for many years would just turn up the volume in my head. So as I was painting, I could just hear a sort of narrative, the meaning, the symbology, etc. And I actually needed to write it down, because otherwise, I mean, you have to do something with it, right? But then during lockdown, there was a moment from, you probably heard in the interview last week, there was lockdown, which for me was really intense emotionally. Well, it was the unknown, and it was pretty surreal. But it's with the death of George Floyd, for me, it was like the lowest point ever in my lifetime. I'd never experienced such a low point for mankind. And I wrote compulsively for several days, and I wrote poetry, which I don't do. So it was kind of an interesting situation where suddenly I was painting pretty much every day during lockdown, but at the death of George Floyd, something happened where I absolutely needed to write. And I wrote for about a week solid, and it's becoming a book. So for me, the writing aspect this year has really been interesting.
That's a good point. Yeah, it was shocking. The whole affair was awful, and it continued. And then we had the trial, and man, it was just endless. Like this one sparking event, which. And then you say that you wanted to write about it. Well, yeah, great. That's very well done. And it really reminded me of something that I was mildly obsessed with whilst when I was younger was the May 1968 riot in Paris. It was a big topic, big subject for me, and where a lot of this situationist thought came from. If you know much about that, but the terms of appropriation and using things that exist, but to create something new, that was something I really admired about that particular time. And the death of George Floyd and anything else that's happened in the consequent months has been similar, but in a different way. It's more media based. It's more video, more instant, you know. But it means the same. One particular moment sparks off any number of things, which you're right.
But it's interesting. So were you sort of investigating the events of May 1968? Because that didn't quite happen in your own... I mean, how old were you then?
No, I mean, I researched it, yeah, when I was...
Okay.
I researched it as a subject to write about whilst I was at college. But I was more interested in, what the Situationist International were writing about before this in the 50s, where this subversive, overtly left-wing magazine came from. But yeah, the May 68 riot, it just seemed so cool at the time, right? Because I was in England and nothing like that had ever happened and probably never will.
I see.
Right. But there was something about it which it must have been incredible as an event, or to live at that time, and to see these new ideas and new art just appearing all the time. But the major angle for me there was the protest, okay, the act of protest.
Okay.
What does this say about society? But I think I was trying to tenuously link if protest was an art form.
Oh, right.
Right. This was my idea. I think I failed miserably in joining those two together, but since then, I've always been interested in work that has that kind of look of the late 60s and, and the more postmodern feel.
Yeah.
Because it's deliberately self-knowing, right? There's no hiding from it that this is conceptual work. I admire that in art these days. The people who are more interested in where this idea came from, and it's a representation of that.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. I'm more inclined towards process work these days.
Okay, so the 60s were kind of a really important point for you. You get a lot of inspiration from that time, don't you?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think because people still talk about it, right? It's an interesting thing. If I was to talk about something like culture jamming from the 80s, okay, equally important in terms of how media developed later on, but not many people talk about that in the same kind of way that they talk about late 60s work, which was doing a very similar thing. So yeah, I think the fact that it's still very strong, that birth of postmodernism for me, is something that I want to continue today.
It's an interesting parallelism as well, isn't it? That very similar events have happened again now, 2021.
That's true.
2020, where we had that a renewed interest in social issues, in civil rights protests.
Right.
There's been an enormous amount of protest in the midst of a pandemic as well, which has kind of emphasized the power of the protests, because people were taking additional risks with their own health. They were exposing themselves to a pandemic to protest, which I found really quite powerful. I mean, it's difficult to ignore a protest when people are risking their lives in that way for a social cause. So I've found civil rights really quite, I've had a renewed interest this year in civil rights. So I've been reading a lot about it because it's taken us back to the 60s, to a time when civil rights made a huge impact. There was a lot of progress. For the last few decades, we've reverted back, and things have started to relax a lot in that aspect. And then again, that event, the murder of George Floyd, has reignited this sense of we need to sort this out once and for all.
Yeah, very true.
Really.
There has been a comment from Cole's Gallery. Thanks for writing in. And Joss wants to know what do we think of Joseph Beuys and his take on healing and protest work? So what do you think, Sonia? Is that something that
I'm not really familiar with it, to be honest.
Okay, well, yeah, Joseph Beuys was a sculptor, but had a very personal link to his work. A very interesting guy. He always wore the same hat for some reason. That kind of became like a thing, you know. But what Joss is asking, yes, thanks for the question. On protest as a healing aspect, yeah, it does have some connection to this, doesn't it? I haven't looked at that work for some time, probably not since I wrote that article in the late 60s, but I am a fan of that there are certain experiences that are symbolized in these banal objects. Joseph Beuys used a lot of, well, famously, a lot of felt material, wax, you know, objects that have no real meaning in themselves, but together they represent things. And that's a good question, so thank you. It is relevant. And is also another reason why I liked to move to Turin. There's a lot of the late 60s artists from this city were approaching similar concepts in their work. The idea of waste material is very important to them. What it means to society and how it's constructed. Arte povera is a big thing for me. And now that I live on the doorstep to it, I can see it quite often, which is really great. But a very kind of socially, politically aware way of working from that period, which I also find a big influence, particularly Alighiero Boetti is a brilliant artist, or was a brilliant artist from that period. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, I'd definitely check him out. Alighiero Boetti, Boetti.
Okay. Well, I'm an artist and psychologist, so I'm very interested in the relationship between both disciplines. And I think when artists really focus on these social aspects, there is an inherent need to for self-healing, you know, because anything that is so damaging to society, like as civil rights, actually really scars individuals. It's very obvious in the collective. It causes movements, etc. But for individuals as well, I think when an artist starts to really work along those lines, it's because they really need to release these emotions, maybe the injustice, all these really strong views, and express them somehow, communicate them, which helps to get people together as well. It helps to mobilize people. It helps to raise awareness, and have an effect in society in itself.
Yeah, but that is something that I found well, is protest an art form? That was the big question. You know, there's a big, well, everything that's involved with a protest, right? So the planning, the people that go, the things that are made to go on the protest. Okay, who's the target? Who's the victim? Who's the hated figure? You know, all this stuff together was, for me, like a happening. You know, like that word, to use that word from the 60s, but to explain or confront something which is collectively relevant, like a protest.
So do you have any particular piece that you would say really reflects that art as protest more than others?
Yes. I think it's my best piece that I've made recently, but some others may argue. It was a political piece, a sculpture. It was called Monument to the European Union. And it was shown here in Italy at the Cavallerizza Ideale a couple of years ago, which is a great collective, now sadly defunct in a sense. But that piece of work was a sculpture that took the form of a architect's model. After Brexit and the problems that many artists had in terms of travelling or loss of connection, they were, what do I do now? So this was the project. I wanted to make something which was from the future, right? So I faked documents, I forged letters, and I made a model of a monument that romanticized the European Union. So,
was it including the UK or not?
Well, I didn't really make any reference to it. I think the winning architect was English. I remember that. So that was, but it was all fake. So I was fascinated by that look of something official. Okay, like letters and models and council letters from whoever. Okay, oh, congratulations, you've won this. What's the next step? Okay, now here's the model. Let's show it for what it is, as a beautiful thing to look at. But the meaning of it was that it it commemorated what used to be the European Union. So I set the whole piece of work in 2030, I think, in the future, and made an installation about this. I think that was the best thing I've done. But because that political atmosphere has now kind of died away.
I would argue that. This morning I was reading comments on Facebook about people complaining that their business in UK have gone bust because of Brexit. The challenge is in getting even a parcel from a family, from a relative with a gift, you know, from anywhere in Europe, because the taxes have become ridiculous. I mean, nowadays, for me to consider sending a painting to Europe, you know, what I would have to do, you know, the amount of paperwork, 4 different forms, making sure everything is correct, or it would either be taxed or returned, etc. So I'm actually thinking I'd rather work with any other country, just not the, you know, not the EU bloc. So I would argue, actually, you know, your piece of work sounds really relevant, because we have absolutely not seen the end of this. And lucky you're in Italy.
Yeah, well, anyone could still come. It's just, there's a stigma now, isn't there? There's some kind of banal stigma about it. It's invisible, but it's definitely changed. But that piece of work really questioned that. Like, it was a prediction, really, a prediction of the failure. So what you're talking about in terms of, oh, I can't send this piece to Europe without doing this. Oh, it's very boring and very banal as an artist, like these kind of systems. But then all of this kind of thing I predicted would just escalate into this eventual, break of the whole thing, which would be very sad. And so I realized this and moved out to Europe before I got stuck.
Lucky you. I mean, I'm half French, half Spanish.
Interesting.
And it just pains me to be here in this situation.
Another comment from Cole's Gallery. I must have read this. Do you think contemporary art makes a safe place, protest and critique? It becomes difficult now for real change. Interesting point. Do you think contemporary art is safe from this? That there's is there an agenda with contemporary art? Are they avoiding this kind of thing, or is it dealt with? Is that what you mean? Is it safe in terms of that it's an industry and it's a market and it will in some way exist beyond all this trouble? What do you think, Sonia?
You would hope that that any gallery would be open to social critique or freedom of expression, etc. But often we do know there is an agenda. Not every gallery is keen, as some are more than others. But obviously, as an artist, if that's what you do, then that's what you do. And you shouldn't have to change. Your art should come from within yourself, as genuine as possible. And you would hope that the contemporary art market is willing to support artists and work with artists in their expression. And ultimately, in society, if something happens, artists are going to be dealing with the topic.
Yeah, they do. But I think how hidden is it? Is it too? How can I describe it? Is it too cerebral sometimes, maybe, or is it? I guess what people are doing now with what used to happen with like flash mobs and things like that a few years ago. This more direct way of engaging with ideas for whatever end, but that's just an example. But I think, you can make statements in work, but I think the selective subjectivity of it will always limit your success in carrying off that idea about what you want to say. Some people ignore it completely. That's just how things are at the moment. But when people do see this work, it's very, I don't know. When people saw the monument to the EU, some people were really fascinated by it, or some people really hated it. It was black and white, which I thought was fascinating personally. It provoked some kind of reaction, which is what I wanted in the first place. So that's why I think it was a success.
For a piece like that, I guess the writing part is quite important. Did you write about that piece? Because it would probably have required
yeah, I did write about it, but it was part of the work. I think I invented a counsellor from South London. I invented a department of so it was all nonsense, but a lot of writing involved. So in a very formal, prosaic way, like invitations for the press release and when can you come to the press night, stuff like that.
In 2030.
In 2030, yeah.
It's quite thought-provoking, actually, to use that time frame and that futuristic edge it really quite entices.
But because now it's very relevant, people think about it in this way. But I think if I wanted to do that, to detach it by 10 years and maybe predict what people would be like then about this topic. That idea was sparked off by seeing something in the Galleria di Arte Moderna here in Turin. And they had a really great exhibition about failed monument plans. They presented them as works in their own right. So very interesting public places where a monument is very recognizable now, but they presented things like the failed options, what was rejected. All right, that was a really interesting show. Some really crazy ideas, but if they won the competition, they would be not considered crazy because they would be part of the public consciousness now, which was a fascinating idea to work with in terms of time.
It really is, actually.
Yeah. In terms of time.
Because if you think of the amount of art submissions that are not accepted, just because of the sheer number, thousands, tens of thousands sometimes of artists submitting to an art opportunity, and only a handful are selected.
Yeah.
For monuments, it's actually the same thing, isn't it? You get
it's possible, yeah. But you never know about these things because they failed. So another question from Cole's Gallery, who's getting into this one. Do you think work with a good politics can trump work with a good aesthetic? Excellent question. Personally, to me, yes. It stays with you longer, I think. There was something I was writing about recently where you think about political work when you're walking down the street to the shop. You know, it's this kind of attitude to thinking about work, whereas that doesn't necessarily happen with aesthetic work for me. I think in terms of my influences, the aesthetic is very postmodernist, and that is an aesthetic. That's not political. But it has to be some aesthetic, otherwise there's nothing to see. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do find work with very poor aesthetics really frustrating.
Frustrating.
For me, the lack of aesthetics in art is a big problem. But then again, you know, there are as many takes on art as there are individuals, you know. Some works are so powerful because the concept is so strong that you almost, you know, it kind of pierces through everything else.
Yeah, and I think on that point, Sonia, I was looking at some of your work, and this comes into it. Okay, there's a very clear aesthetic with yours, which is really cool, like second wave futurism, if that would make sense. What the futurists were doing at that time was very anti-everything, like anti-human, anti-politics, anti-form. It's kind of nihilistic as an art form, but one that I find quite fascinating. And I can kind of see the second wave version in your work, aesthetically speaking, anyway.
I have such specific ideas about aesthetics. And I'm a self-taught artist. For me, color is the beginning of everything. First there's color, then there's form, and then everything else follows. But there is definitely, I like all things futuristic. For me, human evolution, where we're going, where this planet is going, how long are we going to be here for is a huge question. So I kind of, but in my art, I need to achieve a sort of timelessness as well. It's not even about, for me, there has to be a timelessness about it. There's a sort of meditative aspect. I use a lot of geometry, but for me, there has to be a beauty quality about a painting.
Yes.
You see what I mean? Which is a big taboo in contemporary art. I
It
see a
is,
lot of
yeah.
art,
It's
and you talk to the artists, and there is no mention whatsoever of any beauty quality.
any
God forbid,
beauty,
you know,
yeah.
no, they do not want to hear the word, they do not want to have to mention it or discuss it. But for me, you know, my paintings have to have a beauty quality, otherwise I wouldn't want to look at them.
Good
You
point.
know, for me, that's in art. There's got to be a really strong aesthetic quality. My colors are really specific, and it has to work. There has to be a composition. Every painting has to be a universe in its own right. It has to stand in its own right. So I don't do this whole series where everything's the same. You know what I mean? So I have very, very specific ideas about how I work.
And that's very evident. It's very, very evident.
I don't look at what anybody else does, to be honest. I'm working in my studio, and I don't really look around that much. So in terms of influences, I don't have many. So yeah, I have been called an island because in the contemporary world, you're supposed to like Tracy Emin and the Chapman brothers and the list. You know, you get a list and you're supposed to like them and follow them. But I really don't follow any you know, I do my own thing, really.
No, I admire that in artists. There is a lot of pressure to do this, but I think that if you find something that you find that is a good balance between this element of aesthetic and concept, then you're onto a winner. But it's interesting you mentioned how much time we have left. I think we have about 5 minutes.
Okay.
But it's been great to speak to you about these things. And this conflict of interest in whether people appreciate things for what they are or what they symbolize. I think this is definitely something that I will be doing more of this year in a more sculptural sense, I think. Still using location, but I think the social interaction thing is very interesting, but it's very of this time, very topical. I'm just wondering when, once the lockdown finishes and once this is all over, will that kind of work become trite in a way? Would that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be a process, isn't it? It's been a multi-year. Everybody's a bit traumatized, and then the mood will change. We'll process the events, and it will all it will dissipate a little bit, hopefully, quickly, and we'll see how it evolves. But it will be a process for sure.
For sure, definitely. So to guess to...
Sorry.
No, go on.
Are you going more into sculpture work? What do you mean by doing more sculptural work?
My next work will be the great 8 car parks of the world.
Wow. Okay. So, that sounds...
and that's going to be a sculpture, I hope. Again, looking at location and what's attached to it. Okay, what do people do? So I can't really show you anything because it's all in my head. But yeah, the 8 great car parks of the world is the title.
It sounds very ambitious. I can't wait to see it.
Right, that should be a good one. So yes, if anyone wants to see any of these projects that I've been speaking about this evening, then please go to samvickers.net. samvickers.com will take you to a windscreen wiper in America somewhere. I don't know. Somebody bought it before I could. So well done, my counterpart in the US. But yeah, samvickers.net is the site, and there are also essays which you can read at your pleasure. So thank you very much, Sonia. That's been a really interesting interview. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. It's been fascinating, and best of luck with your future projects.
Thanks very much, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Speak soon. Hi, Lucy.
Hello. Wow. I could just continue listening to you for forever, really. But we have come up to our hour. So thank you both very much. Thank you, Sonia. Sam, we'll see you back next week interviewing Leslie.
Yes, you will.
Yes. So if anyone would like to see Sam and Sonia's work, please go to thevirtualartfair.co.uk. And please check out their Instagram and websites because their work is amazing. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.
Buonasera a tutti. Buonasera.
Bye bye.
Ciao, ciao, ciao.